$22,000 for dinner. Are you out of your mind?
Adrian Blackwood shouted as he stared at the receipt in disbelief. The luxurious dining room of Le Petit Paris fell completely silent. Every guest turned toward VIP Table 4. Across from him, a young waitress stood perfectly calm, showing no fear whatsoever. Moments earlier, Adrian had been laughing with his friend, convinced he had won a $10,000 wager. Now his face had gone pale. In his trembling hand was a receipt that would change the course of his life forever. What Adrian did not realize was that the woman standing in front of him had understood every insulting word he had spoken about her all night. And before this evening was over, the billionaire who believed money could buy anything was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. And it all started because he thought a waitress could not understand French. 3 hours earlier, 24-year-old Clara Bennett was starting another exhausting shift at Le Petit Paris in Manhattan. Her posture was composed, her expression professional, but the exhaustion in her eyes told a different story. This was her 14th consecutive shift of the month. Earlier that evening, her phone had vibrated with another email from her university. The deadline to re-enroll for the next semester was approaching. If she could not return soon, she would lose the merit scholarship that covered most of her tuition. Clara glanced at the notification for a brief second before locking the screen and slipping the phone back into her apron. Some dreams, she had learned, could be postponed. Family could not. At that moment, the front doors opened and several heads turned. Adrian Blackwood, 32, founder of Blackwood Capital and one of Wall Street's rising stars, entered the restaurant with his longtime friend Jackson. Adrian wore a custom-tailored Seville rose suit that fit him with effortless precision. His confidence bordered on arrogance, the kind earned by someone who had spent years winning negotiations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. As he reached the VIP table beside the large front window, he deliberately placed the key fob to his Bugatti and a thick leather wallet on the table where they would be impossible to miss. Clara picked up a tray with 2 glasses of water and approached with the calm professionalism expected at Le Petit Paris. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Le Petit Paris. It is an honor to have you tonight. Are you ready to look at the menu, or should I bring you some aperitifs first?" Adrian barely looked up. He removed a silk handkerchief from his pocket, lightly brushed his fingertips, then turned toward Jackson and spoke in fluent French, completely convinced the young waitress could not understand a word. "Look at this waitress, Jackson. She has that tired look people get when they spend their lives counting pennies just to make rent. It's fascinating how poverty leaves fingerprints on a person's face. I'll bet you $10,000 that with a little performance and a display of wealth, I can have her asking for my phone number before the night is over. People from the lower class are so predictable. Their dignity disappears the moment money enters the room." Jackson took a sip of water and smirked. "You never change, Adrian. You honestly think the entire world revolves around your investment portfolio. Not every woman is impressed by a luxury car and a bank account. Still, I like the bet. $10,000. Let's see whether your Wall Street instincts work on ordinary people, or whether tonight finally teaches you some humility." Clara understood every single word. For a fraction of a second, her grip tightened around the tray. Then the reaction vanished. Her face remained perfectly composed, her voice polite, her posture professional. She lowered her head slightly according to restaurant protocol. "I will give you gentlemen a few more minutes with the wine list. Please let me know when you are ready to make your selection." She turned and walked away. Adrian watched her leave and laughed confidently. In his mind, the game had already begun. What he didn't realize was that the only person sitting at that table who truly understood the rules was the woman he had already underestimated. The moment Clara stepped through the swinging kitchen doors, the noise of the dining room faded behind her. The warm glow of the restaurant remained, but here the atmosphere felt different, more intimate, more honest. She moved toward the linen station and reached for a stack of freshly folded towels. Before she could turn away, Pierre noticed the subtle change in her expression. The 60-year-old owner of Le Petit Paris had spent decades reading people, and Clara was no exception. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Clara, is everything all right with Table 4? That man is Adrian Blackwood. Everyone in Manhattan knows who he is. He has more money than most people could spend in 10 lifetimes. But he also has a reputation for looking down on hardworking people. I am sorry I assigned you to his table. If he causes any trouble, You come get me immediately. Clara looked at Pierre. The exhaustion that had shadowed her face earlier seemed to disappear. In its place appeared a spark of intelligence and quiet confidence. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Do not worry, Uncle Pierre. I am perfectly fine. In fact, I think tonight may become one of the most profitable evenings Le Petit Paris has ever had. Those gentlemen just handed me an opportunity. Pierre studied her for a moment. He had seen that look before. Years earlier, when a supplier had accidentally overcharged the restaurant by thousands of dollars, it was Clara who found the accounting error within minutes. Another time, she had discovered discrepancies in inventory records that saved the restaurant from a costly financial loss. More than once, Pierre had told her she belonged in a corporate boardroom, not carrying trays across a dining room. What are you thinking? He asked. Clara glanced toward the private wine cellar door. Could you unlock the private cellar for me, Uncle Pierre? Clara asked, her eyes gleaming with a brilliant plan. I want to activate our exclusive charity dining package for Table 4. That billionaire wants to prove his status, so let's help him do it by funding the hospital. Pierre, who despised Adrienne's arrogance, let out a proud smile. He knew the legalities of the restaurant's elite partnership program perfectly. Handing her the key, he whispered, Do it, Clara. Teach him what real value means. I trust you, as I always do. Moments later, Clara returned to the dining room. At the VIP table, Adrienne had conveniently opened his wallet just enough to reveal a thick stack of $100 bills and his prestigious black card. The polished Bugatti key remained positioned where every passing employee could see it. As Clara cleared the appetizer plates, Adrienne leaned back comfortably in his chair and offered her a confident smile. We want the absolute best experience your restaurant can provide tonight, Clara. Money is never an issue for me. What would you recommend? And please do not suggest the house steak. I am looking for something truly premium. Clara widened her eyes slightly, pretending to be impressed by the display of wealth in front of her. Well, Mr. Blackwood, for guests with exceptionally refined taste, we do have something very special. We maintain a private reserve featuring rare vintages from Bordeaux and Burgundy. They are not listed on the regular menu. Only a select group of clients even know they exist. Guests who choose the private cellar experience also receive a commemorative certificate through one of our exclusive partnership programs. However, they are extremely expensive. I am not sure if. Adrienne laughed before she could finish. He glanced toward Jackson with obvious satisfaction, as though he believed the evening was unfolding exactly as he predicted. Expensive? Clara, I make investment decisions worth millions before most people finish breakfast. Bring out the best. Whatever matches my status, keep it coming. I trust your judgment completely. Do not concern yourself with the price. Just make it memorable. At that exact moment, a $100 bill slipped from his wallet onto the table. Adrienne barely noticed. Clara picked it up carefully and placed it beside his glass. I believe you dropped this, sir. In a rare moment of hesitation, Adrienne paused. Jackson quietly observed the exchange, but said nothing. Clara lowered her head respectfully. As part of our private cellar experience, I will also prepare your commemorative certificate for this evening. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I promise this evening will be unforgettable. As she walked away toward the cellar, Adrienne smiled with complete confidence. Across the table, Jackson watched her disappear through the dining room and felt an unexpected sense that something about this situation was not unfolding the way Adrienne imagined. Over the next 2 hours, an intricate psychological game unfolded beneath the warm lights of Le Petit Paris. Adrienne Blackwood played his role with complete confidence. Between courses, he spoke about private yachts anchored along the Mediterranean coast, exclusive investment retreats in Switzerland, and sprawling estates in the Hamptons where influential business leaders gathered behind closed doors. Every story seemed carefully designed to reinforce the same message. He belonged to a world most people could only dream about. Across the table, Jackson listened with growing amusement while Clara continued her performance flawlessly. Each time she approached the table, she appeared impressed by Adrienne's success. She listened attentively, poured wine with perfect precision, and offered polite smiles at exactly the right moments. To Adrienne, every gesture confirmed his belief that the evening was unfolding exactly as he had predicted. What he never realized was that Clara was paying attention to something entirely different. While Adrienne focused on impressing her, Clara quietly guided the experience. One rare bottle after another emerged from the private cellar. Each selection carried decades of history and exceptional value. Before serving every bottle, she carefully followed restaurant policy, clearly identifying the vintage and receiving verbal confirmation from the table. Adrian barely listened. Each time, he responded with the same confidence. Sounds perfect. Bring it out. Only the best. Do not worry about the cost. The more expensive the recommendation became, the more determined Adrian seemed to prove that price meant nothing to him. At one point, Jackson studied Clara as she presented another rare vintage. Something about her composure continued to bother him. Most people reacted visibly when confronted with overwhelming wealth. Clara did not. She seemed almost too calm. You know, Jackson said casually after Clara stepped away. For someone who is supposedly impressed by all of this, she does not seem very interested in your money. Adrian laughed. Trust me, people rarely show their intentions immediately. Give it time. Jackson glanced toward the service station. Maybe. Or maybe you are not reading this situation as well as you think. Adrian dismissed the comment with a wave of his hand. Wall Street is built on reading people correctly. It is practically mathematics. By the time dessert arrived, Adrian's confidence had reached its peak. The dining room had begun to quiet as late evening guests finished their meals. Outside the large front windows, Manhattan glowed beneath thousands of city lights. Finally, Jackson leaned back in his chair and signaled for the check. Clara appeared moments later carrying a black leather check presenter. Adrian removed his prestigious black card and placed it inside with casual confidence. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an expensive gold-trimmed pen. On a small piece of paper, he neatly wrote his personal phone number before sliding it toward Clara with a self-satisfied smile. You did an exceptional job tonight, Clara. You are far too smart to spend your life carrying plates in a restaurant. Give me a call after your shift. Maybe I can show you what a truly premium life looks like beyond these kitchen doors. Clara looked at the paper, then at the phone number, and finally at Adrian. Her expression remained respectful and unreadable. She accepted the check presenter with both hands. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I appreciate your generosity. I will process your payment immediately. As she walked toward the payment station, Adrian leaned back in his chair and turned toward Jackson with the satisfaction of a man convinced he had already won. Speaking in French, he extended his hand. It is over, Jackson. Did you see that? She took my number without hesitation. That shy smile was practically an invitation. Prepare my $10,000. People in her position cannot resist power and money. It is simple. Mathematics. Wall Street always wins. Jackson watched Clara disappear behind the service counter. Instead of celebrating, he felt an unexpected sense of unease. Maybe you won, he replied in French. But something still feels wrong. She is not like the others. When she accepted your number, I did not see excitement. I did not see greed. I saw something much colder. Let us wait until she brings back the receipt. In a rare moment of unease, a brief silence settled over the table. Adrian remained confident, but somewhere deep inside, a small seed of uncertainty had quietly begun to grow. Several minutes later, Clara returned to VIP Table 4. The shy smile, hesitant posture, and wide-eyed admiration she had displayed throughout the evening were gone. In their place stood a completely different woman. Her shoulders were straight, her expression calm, and her confidence unmistakable. Even Jackson immediately noticed the change. Without a word, Clara placed the black leather check presenter in front of Adrian Blackwood. Your transaction is complete, Mr. Blackwood. Your card was approved. Along with your receipt, you will also find a special certificate of appreciation from our establishment. Adrian reached for the presenter with complete confidence. The outcome seemed obvious to him. He expected to retrieve his card, enjoy his victory, collect $10,000 from Jackson, and leave with another story confirming his view of the world. Then he opened the receipt. The smile disappeared from his face almost instantly. His eyes scanned the page once, then twice. Jackson leaned forward, noticing the sudden change in Adrian's expression. At the bottom of the receipt, one number stood out in bold print, $21,980.40. Listed beneath the meal were 2 bottles of Romanicani 2010 from the restaurant's private cellar collection, along with a premium gourmet package prepared as part of the VIP dining experience. Attached to the receipt was an official certificate from St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, confirming a $20,000 charitable contribution funded through the restaurant's exclusive charity dining package. For several seconds, Adrian simply stared at the documents. The bustling sounds of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background. Finally, he looked up, demanding angrily, "What is this? $22,000 for dinner? I never ordered these wines. This is a scam. There has to be some mistake. Call your manager immediately." Nearby guests quietly turned their attention toward the table. Jackson remained seated, studying Clara carefully. Unlike Adrian, she did not appear nervous or defensive. She stood there completely composed and in full control of the situation. Clara met Adrian's gaze without flinching. Then something happened that neither man expected. She spoke in flawless French, her pronunciation elegant and precise. "Monsieur Adrian Blackwood, every time you pushed your Bugatti key toward me to show off, every time you displayed your wealth while discussing your $10,000 wager with your friend, every time I approached your table and asked whether you wished to enjoy another selection from our exclusive cellar collection, you gave the exact same answer." Adrian froze. A look of pure, unadulterated shock crossed his face, an expression entirely foreign to a man of his standing. Clara smoothly switched back to English, her voice steady, professional, and completely sharp. "Mr. Blackwood, you were so blinded by your own vanity that you signed a premium service agreement without reading the fine print. At Le Petit Paris, our private cellar experience is legally tied to a charitable partnership. Every vintage I brought out was clearly priced under the hospital donation tier. You personally gave your verbal consent for every selection, and our dining room's audio and video security system recorded everything. In the eyes of the law, you didn't just buy dinner. You legally authorized a $20,000 corporate donation to save sick children. Wall Street values contracts, Mr. Blackwood, and your contract tonight is ironclad." She removed a small printed document from the folder and placed it beside the receipt. "This is a summary of our premium service policy. You acknowledged it when I introduced the cellar collection. You also repeatedly instructed me to bring the finest experience available, regardless of price." Jackson reached for the document and quietly reviewed it. The timestamps matched the service schedule throughout the evening. Clara continued, "You were so focused on proving a point that you stopped listening. You assumed a waitress could not understand your French. You assumed wealth automatically made you the smartest person in the room. Most importantly, you assumed nobody was paying attention." Silence settled across the table. Adrian looked from the receipt to the certificate and then back to Clara. Around them, the restaurant remained remarkably quiet. Since entering Le Petit Paris, Adrian Blackwood had never looked less in control. In that exact moment, Clara Bennett ceased to look like a woman serving a table. Instead, she finally appeared as who she truly was, the master strategist who had been running the entire game from the very beginning. For several long seconds, absolute silence surrounded VIP Table 4. The confidence that had carried Adrian Blackwood through the entire evening seemed to vanish beneath the weight of a realization he had never anticipated. Across from him, Jackson stared at Clara before suddenly breaking into uncontrollable laughter. The sound echoed through the dining room, drawing amused glances from nearby guests. "Oh my God, Adrian," Jackson said between laughs. "You did not just lose a bet. You walked straight into the most sophisticated lesson I have ever seen. She understood every word of your French from the moment we sat down. You thought you were running the game, but she was 10 moves ahead the entire night." Several diners exchanged smiles. A middle-aged couple seated nearby quietly applauded. Another guest raised a glass toward Clara in silent approval. The atmosphere had shifted completely. What began as a display of wealth had become something far more memorable. Adrian remained frozen. The receipt was still in his hand. The charitable certificate rested beside it. Suddenly, the man who dominated Wall Street boardrooms found himself utterly speechless. His eyes moved toward Clara. Only an hour earlier, he had viewed her as another employee serving another meal. Now he realized he had never understood the person standing in front of him at all. Calmly, Clara reached toward the folded note containing Adrian's phone number. She examined it briefly before placing it on the table. Without drama or hostility, she tore the note neatly into several pieces and placed them inside the empty check presenter. The gesture was simple, professional, and impossible to misunderstand. Then she looked directly at him. "Your money is valuable, Mr. Blackwood," she said. "It creates opportunities. It opens doors. It changes lives. But it becomes most valuable when it helps people who genuinely need it, not when it is used to measure someone's worth." The entire restaurant seemed to listen. Clara continued in the same calm tone. "You assumed that because I work in a restaurant, I would automatically be impressed by wealth. You assumed that because someone earns less money than you, they must be easier to manipulate. But dignity is not a product. Respect is not a transaction. Neither one can be purchased with a credit card." Adrian lowered his eyes. Every sentence landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Clara gently placed his black card on the table in front of him. "As for your phone number, Mr. Blackwood, thank you, but I do not need it." She offered a polite professional nod before turning away from the table. The confidence in her stride was impossible to ignore. She did not look like someone who had won an argument. She looked like someone who had never needed to compete in the first place. Jackson finally stood up from his chair. Reaching into his jacket, he removed a check for $10,000 and placed it beside Adrian's receipt. "Here is your wager," he said with a grin. "And honestly, this may be the best $10,000 I have ever spent. Most people spend years trying to learn humility. You managed to buy a master class in a single evening." He glanced toward the certificate from the children's hospital. At least some good came from it. With that, Jackson shook his head, still smiling, and headed toward the exit. Adrian slowly returned to his seat. Around him, conversations gradually resumed, and the restaurant returned to normal. Yet nothing felt normal to him anymore. He stared at the torn pieces of paper inside the presenter and then at the donation certificate. The embarrassment remained, but something else had begun to replace it. Respect. Genuine respect. For once in his life, Adrian Blackwood found himself forced to confront a possibility he had never seriously considered before. Perhaps success had made him wealthy, but perhaps it had also blinded him. And somewhere between a $25,000 dinner and a waitress who refused to be impressed, the first crack had finally appeared in the world he thought he understood. 1 week later, the memory of that extraordinary evening at Le Petit Paris still lingered in Adrian Blackwood's mind. Yet the setting now could not have been more different. The bright elegance of Manhattan's finest restaurant had been replaced by the sterile hallways of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. The air carried the familiar scent of disinfectant. Medical equipment hummed quietly in the background. Clara Bennett sat beside a hospital bed, gently holding the hand of her 6-year-old sister, Lily. The little girl slept peacefully beneath a blanket decorated with cartoon stars, her small chest rising and falling steadily with the assistance of medical equipment. Clara looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Several unpaid medical statements and treatment estimates were stacked on a nearby table. For months, she had been balancing double shifts, postponed dreams, and overwhelming responsibility in a desperate effort to keep her sister's treatment moving forward. When the hospital room door opened, Clara expected to see a nurse. Instead, Pierre entered first. Behind him stood Adrian Blackwood. The sight immediately caused Clara to rise from her chair. Instinctively, she positioned herself closer to Lily's bedside. Her protective expression made her feelings unmistakably clear. "Mr. Blackwood, what are you doing here? If you came to demand your $25,000 back or to cause trouble because of what happened at the restaurant, please do it somewhere else. My sister has enough to deal with already." Adrian remained near the doorway. He made no attempt to move closer. The confidence and arrogance that once defined him seemed noticeably absent. Instead, there was something unfamiliar in his expression. Humility. "I am not here to take anything back, Clara," he said quietly. "And I certainly did not come here to cause problems for you. Actually, I asked Pierre if he would help me find you because I wanted to understand something." Clara folded her arms. "Understand what?" Adrian glanced briefly toward Lily before looking back at Clara. "You." The answer surprised her. Adrian continued. "After that night, I could not stop thinking about what happened. At first I was angry, then embarrassed, then curious. So I did something I rarely do. I started paying attention." Clara remained silent. Adrian took a slow breath. "I went back to the restaurant several times. Not as a customer. I simply observed. I watched you stay after closing to help clean when it was not your responsibility. I watched you skip breaks to cover shifts for coworkers. I watched you leave every night carrying leftovers that Pierre set aside for you. Eventually, I followed the trail here. Clara's expression softened slightly, but remained cautious. Adrian continued carefully. Then I spoke with Pierre. He told me about your scholarship, your university program, your sister. He told me how many opportunities you sacrificed without complaining. Pierre quietly nodded from the corner of the room. Everything he said is true, Clara. Adrian looked toward the sleeping child. A few days ago, I also met one of the children whose treatment was supported through the donation connected to that dinner. It changed something for me. The room grew quiet. Clara studied him carefully. The man standing before her seemed very different from the billionaire who had entered Le Petit Paris with a wager and an oversized ego. Still, years of disappointment had taught her not to trust appearances too quickly. "Then why are you really here, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked. "Billionaires do not spend time visiting hospital rooms without a reason. There are no reporters here, no cameras, no investors. So what exactly do you want from me?" Adrian held her gaze for several seconds before answering. "Nothing, Clara. Today, I am here not with a transaction, but with an explanation, and perhaps an apology." Adrian remained silent for several seconds after Clara's question. The hospital room felt smaller somehow, as though the weight of everything left unsaid had settled between them. He looked down at the documents resting on the table before finally speaking. "You are wrong about one thing, Clara. I do owe you something." His voice was calm, stripped of the confidence that once dominated every conversation. "A week ago, I walked into your restaurant convinced that success gave me the right to judge people. I believed money could measure value. I believed intelligence belonged exclusively to people sitting in boardrooms and corner offices. Then I met you." Clara said nothing. Adrian slowly opened the leather folder and slid the documents across the table. "After that night, I could not stop thinking about what happened. At first, I told myself you had embarrassed me. Then I reviewed the security footage from the restaurant. I watched every interaction again. I watched you remain professional while I behaved like someone who had forgotten basic respect. Then I started asking questions." He looked toward Pierre, who quietly stood near the doorway. "Pierre told me about the scholarships you earned. He told me about the internships you turned down. He told me how you worked double shifts while maintaining grades most students could only dream of. Most importantly, he told me why." Adrian glanced toward Lily. "While I was wasting $10,000 on a childish bet, you were fighting every single day to keep your sister alive." Clara's eyes moved to the folder. Across the top of the first page were the words corporate sponsorship agreement and full medical coverage. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned another page. There were signatures, official approvals, hospital authorizations, insurance guarantees. Everything appeared real. Adrian continued. 3 days ago, Blackwood Capital finalized a partnership agreement with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. The program will support pediatric cardiology and oncology services. Your sister's outstanding medical balances have already been cleared. Her surgery, rehabilitation, medication, and follow-up care will be covered in full. Clara stared at the paperwork, unable to process what she was hearing. "No," she whispered. "That cannot be possible." "It is already done," Adrian replied. "The hospital administration approved everything yesterday." Tears slowly formed in Clara's eyes. For years she had carried every burden alone. Every extra shift, every missed opportunity, every sleepless night, every impossible bill. Suddenly, a future she had stopped allowing herself to imagine seemed within reach. She looked at Pierre. The older man smiled and nodded. "It is true, Clara." Adrian stepped back slightly, giving her space. "There are no conditions attached to any of this. No publicity campaign, no interviews, no social media announcements, no press releases. The media will never hear my name connected to this program unless the hospital chooses otherwise." Clara lowered herself into the chair beside Lily's bed. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she gently held her sister's hand. "Why?" she asked again. "Why would you do all this for someone you barely know?" Adrian looked toward the sleeping child before answering. "Because it made me realize just how poor I truly was." Clara looked up in confusion. Adrian gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "Not financially, spiritually, morally, emotionally. I built companies. I built wealth. I built influence. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to value people. You reminded me." The room fell quiet again. Outside the hospital window, New York continued moving at its usual relentless pace. Inside that small room, however, something had changed forever. For Clara, it felt like hope. For Adrian, it felt like redemption. And for neither of them, the story was over yet. Clara sat quietly beside Lily's hospital bed, still trying to process everything that had happened over the past few minutes. The documents in her hands felt almost unreal. For years, she had lived one day at a time, calculating bills, balancing work schedules, and searching for ways to stretch every dollar further. For once, the future ahead no longer loomed like an impossible mountain standing in her way. Adrian watched the tears in her eyes and offered a small smile. It was a genuine smile, completely different from the arrogant grin he had worn at Le Petit Paris only 1 week earlier. "You are wrong, Clara," he said softly. "I owe you more than you realize." Clara looked up. Adrian folded his hands in front of him before continuing. "On Wall Street, people spend their entire careers assigning value to things. Companies, properties, stocks, investments. We analyze numbers all day and convince ourselves we understand what matters. We become experts at calculating profit. But somewhere along the way, many of us forget how to recognize value when it cannot be measured on a spreadsheet." He glanced toward Lily before returning his attention to Clara. "You taught me something I should have learned years ago. The most valuable things in life cannot be purchased. Respect, integrity, family, human dignity, compassion. Those things never appear in quarterly reports, yet they are worth more than everything sitting inside my investment portfolio." The room grew quiet again. Pierre stood near the doorway, listening without interruption. Adrian took a slow breath. "You did not simply force me to make a donation that night. You forced me to confront the person I had become. I spent years building wealth while neglecting the qualities that made success meaningful. You reminded me that influence carries responsibility." Clara lowered her eyes. Part of her wanted to believe him. Another part remained cautious. Years of struggle had taught her that promises often disappeared when reality arrived. Adrian seemed to understand her hesitation. "I know trust is not something earned in a week," he said. "And honestly, if our positions were reversed, I would probably question my motives too." A faint smile appeared on Clara's face. Adrian stepped closer to the table and opened another section of the folder. "That is why I am not offering charity. I am offering an opportunity." Clara looked at him curiously. Adrian removed a formal document bearing the Blackwood Capital logo. "Our firm is launching a major philanthropic initiative. We need someone capable of evaluating programs, managing budgets, negotiating partnerships, and making sure resources actually reach the people who need them." He slid the document toward her. "The position is Associate Director of Corporate Philanthropy." Clara blinked several times. "You cannot be serious." Adrian laughed quietly. "I have never been more serious." He pointed toward the paperwork. "I reviewed your academic records. Your professors described you as one of the strongest students in the program. Pierre described you as the most capable person he has ever hired. And after meeting you, I have no doubt they were both right." Clara looked down at the offer. The salary alone exceeded anything she had ever imagined earning. Yet what caught her attention most was not the compensation. It was the mission, helping families facing challenges similar to her own, helping children like Lily, helping people who often went unnoticed. "How do I know this is not another game?" she asked quietly. Adrian's expression became serious. "Because a week ago I would have offered you money. Today I am offering you responsibility." Clara studied him carefully. Looking at him now, she finally believed the transformation might be real. Slowly, she stood and extended her hand. Adrian accepted it. Their handshake felt less like a business agreement and more like the beginning of a new chapter neither of them had expected. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," Clara said, "for helping my sister, and for finally learning how to listen." Then a playful spark returned to her eyes. "As for the job offer, I will review every detail very carefully. I am known to be an extremely difficult negotiator." Adrian let out a rare laugh, his tension instantly melting away. The tension in the room instantly eased. "I would expect nothing less," he replied. "After all, you are the only person I know who managed to defeat Wall Street in a single evening." 3 months later, winter had settled over Manhattan. Snow drifted gently through the afternoon sky, covering sidewalks, rooftops, and parked cars in a blanket of white. Inside Le Petit Paris, the atmosphere remained warm and inviting. The restaurant had not yet opened for dinner service, leaving the dining room unusually quiet. Soft jazz played from the same vintage record player that had been spinning on the night everything changed. Behind the bar, Pierre polished a wine glass while occasionally glancing toward VIP table 4. Every time he looked in that direction, a proud smile appeared on his face. At the familiar table beside the window sat Clara Bennett. The worn restaurant uniform was gone. In its place was a tailored navy business suit that reflected the confidence she had earned rather than purchased. A tablet rested in her hands as she reviewed funding proposals for new educational and medical assistance programs supported by Blackwood Capital's philanthropic division. During the past 3 months, dozens of scholarships had been awarded, several community programs had been launched, and hundreds of families had received support that previously seemed impossible. Most importantly, Lily's recovery was progressing better than anyone had expected. The hospital reports now carried optimism instead of uncertainty. The restaurant door opened, allowing a brief gust of cold air to enter. Adrian Blackwood stepped inside. He wore a simple black overcoat and carried 2 cups of coffee purchased from a small neighborhood cafe a few blocks away. There was no chauffeur waiting outside. No luxury vehicle parked at the curb. No audience. No performance. Just a man walking into a restaurant that had permanently changed the course of his life. As he approached the table, he instinctively reached into his coat pocket and removed his car keys. For a moment, he placed them on the table exactly the way he had months earlier. Then he paused. A quiet laugh escaped him. Shaking his head, he slipped the keys back into his pocket. "Old habits," he said. Clara immediately recognized the reference and smiled. Adrian took a seat across from her and handed over one of the coffees. "Good afternoon, Director Bennett." Clara accepted the cup. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blackwood." Adrian glanced toward her tablet. "I just finished reviewing your proposal for the new York Working Families Education Initiative. The board approved every recommendation." He sighed dramatically. "You continue finding creative ways to make me spend enormous amounts of money." Clara laughed softly and took a sip of coffee. "Wealth without purpose is just a number on a statement. I am simply helping you invest in investments that actually change lives." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Assets?" Clara nodded toward the list of scholarship recipients displayed on her tablet. "Future teachers, future doctors, future engineers. Those are long-term investments." Adrian could not argue with that logic. Looking around the restaurant, he realized how different everything felt compared to 3 months earlier. The same tables remained. The same music played. Yet the people sitting at VIP table 4 were no longer the same individuals. Clara looked up from her tablet. "By the way, how is your French these days? Have you been practicing?" Adrian smiled and lifted his coffee cup in a small toast. Then, in fluent French, he answered, "I learn every day, Clara. Most importantly, I am learning how to become a better man, one worthy of sitting at your table. Thank you for showing me what truly matters." Clara understood every word, just as she had on the first night they met. The difference was that this time there was no arrogance behind the language, only gratitude. She gently tapped her coffee cup against his. The soft sound echoed through the quiet restaurant. Outside, snow continued falling across the streets of Manhattan. Inside, neither wealth nor status occupied the space between them anymore. What remained was something far more valuable: mutual respect, understanding, purpose, and the knowledge that sometimes the most important investment a person can make is not in markets, companies, or financial portfolios, but in becoming someone better than they were yesterday. As Pierre watched from behind the bar, he smiled once more. After all, it was not every day that a waitress changed a billionaire's life, and, in the process, changed her own as well.